CDs longer. You can make them an hour long instead of 40 minutes.
Yeah. You tried an Apollo cycle and then a computer cycle between the audiobook sessions and this. I mean, it should not be necessary, but I have had sound cards freak out when I switch, and I've had to deal with hard restarts. Granted, it wasn't on a Mac, but I don't know, it's not impossible.
Well, I power everything down every night. So we'll see what the profile looks like now. If nothing else, I have to say I delivered a book yesterday, and it took me like a 10th of the time that it's been taking with the new computer. It was just so fast at processing everything and flinging it up to the interwebs.
T-minus 2 minutes, which means I better go get something to drink. BRB.
Greetings and welcome to Office Hours. If you are new here and you want to learn a little bit more about what we do, head over to officehours.global. Our first hour, we answer your questions on media and digital productions. And our second hour is something that we typically want to spend a little bit more time on. And today we're going to be speaking with Ryan Hinkson of Eat Famous. Check out his Instagram and get those questions ready for the second hour. And speaking of second hour, Jason, let's get into these questions.
You got it, Liberty. Ed Judge in West Granbury, Connecticut writes in, my wife just retired and turned in her work computer. We are getting her an M2 Mac Mini and need advice on a display looking at a Dell 4K UHD USB-C S2722QC or a BenQ 4K EW2880U. Any advice or alternatives are appreciated.
Right back to you, Jason.
All right, you got it. If you look at the straight raw ratings, what you'll find is that the Dell is rated slightly higher. In my experience, assuming you're going to calibrate it, I like the BenQ if given the choice between one and the other.
Alex?
Yeah, I will admit that I'm going to go the other direction. I'm a big fan of. I don't have a lot of BenQs. I've had a couple, and they have worked great. So they're totally fine if you go that direction. I just have a lot of Dells. Now, the only thing I'll say is that there are There are 3 requirements that I have for every monitor. There's a C13, which is the cable, little 3-prong cable. It has to have a C13, has to have a VESA mount on the back, has to have an HDMI input. After that, I don't, I'm pretty, other than my color correct monitors, they all kind of, do what they need to do. Some of the Dells, and I don't know about the BenQ, will have a power supply somewhere that's external to and it just becomes this thing that you have to deal with. So I would highly recommend making sure that it has those 3 things, but all given, these are all Dells in front of me, and I probably have 30 at the office. So I've been pretty happy with those as a monitor for our Macs.
Next question.
Andre DeLay in Berlin writes in, is it possible to get rid of the invite link within a Zoom meeting? My customers don't want the participants being able to share the invite link out of the meeting.
Go ahead, Alex.
I guess you could just give them the code. You don't need an invite link to let someone into a Zoom. So, now there's a couple different levels of security also that you can add to your Zoom link. So you can have it require a passcode. You can have it require you can be, and then the password can be tied into it. So it's a password and it's tied into the link, but it doesn't have to be. So you can actually give them that separately. You can have it be a waiting room, or they have to be signed in, you have to have one of those, but you can add them all if you want to. So those are the things you can do. The thing to remember is also you can lock registration. So have them register for the meeting, or you register them for the meeting. You can insert that, and then only people with those emails can get in. So that might be another thing, and you can add those to each other. So you can have them have to be registered, and it depends on how big the meeting is. I mean, it becomes the waiting room is great when you have a meeting of 10 or less, or 15 or less. The waiting room becomes a problem if you have 100 people coming to a meeting. So you just got to decide how that looks. But what I do is I give everybody the link, but I put everybody into a waiting room. And so everybody always hits a waiting room when they go to my meetings. And that means that I don't have to send them anything complicated. They can always get in. They don't have to be logged in. But I get to see them before they come in. So that you just have to decide how and that's the lowest lift for for people, the participants. It just means I have to pay attention to my waiting room when people are coming in. So I think some of what you would do there has to do with how many people are coming, but having people register for the event or registering them for the meeting and then locking it to just them is probably the way to keep it there. But otherwise you need a link or a meeting number. You don't have to. Yeah. So that I think those are the limits there.
Next question.
Steve Bucket in Vancouver, BC, Canada writes in, using a Zoom H6 with an XY stereo mic capsule to capture a jet engine startup on my Bell 206 JetRanger helicopter. Compressor limiter is set to general on left and right. Pad is set to negative 20 dB. Audio is between 60 and negative 160 dB. Challenge. At 160 dB, it's blown out. Suggestions?
Go ahead, Bill.
I've been in 2 situations in my career where I've had sound that's been so loud that it's been very hard to get it down into the recording range. One of them was a guy who had a jet-powered go-kart, little round jet on the back of it. It was just very weird circumstance. What I ended up having to do was take an alternate path in and do not 1, but 2 of these guys. This is a Shure switchable inline attenuator. It has up to 25 dB of signal reduction. And first of all, I would not try to use the built-in Zoom microphones to do this because I have no idea what their performance is going to be like. I would get a couple of the large diaphragm dynamics, like maybe RE50s or something similar. Some of the things that people in bands typically use for kick drums that can handle a really high sound pressure level, run them through 1 or 2 of these pads if it's necessary, and you should be able to get down into a recording range. Sometimes these signals are just so loud and they're hitting a diaphragm and putting out so much power that it's really hard to get things down. Try that.
Courtney?
Yeah, I think the problem you may be running into is that on those microphones, the maximum SPL, according to their sheet here, is 136 decibels. So you're exceeding the maximum SPL. That means the diaphragms in the mic are bottoming out and they're causing distortion or just going to 0 a lot of times on a condenser mic because, once the capacitance goes to 0, they're touching, the sound goes to completely flat dead. So you could try plugging a couple of dynamic microphones in there. There's some Shure SM58s would be nice. And that way it may not overwhelm the preamps. And a lot of times you got to realize sometimes that pad, depends on where the pad is. If the pad's between the microphone and the preamp, that's good. If it's after the preamp, then it's bad because the preamp thing can then saturate before it gets to the pad. And also that Zoom H6 is not a 32-bit recorder, and you'd probably be better with 32-bit recorder like the F series, F3 or F6, because then you don't have to worry about exceeding the bit depth of the dynamic range or the sample rate of the, well, the sample rate will be the same, but the bit depth of the dynamic range, you'll have much more dynamic range with 32-bit float to handle that kind of input.
And Alex.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so I agree that the what you're looking for is probably 32-bit. So you need a 32-bit. You can't not those mics because they're not going to have the dynamic range that you have. We've recorded things similar to this that have a really high SPL with Sennheiser 421s going into sound devices with a 32-bit, and we've been pretty successful. And the SPL was a little higher than that. So I think that you may want to look at that, but you need that range because the problem is if you're just knocking things down by putting them through something else, you're not going to get all the little details that happen before and after that. So you need something that and that's what 32-bit is going to give you. Is going to give you that wide range of capture. But yeah, you're looking for a microphone with a high enough SPL to manage that and a dynamic range that'll manage that, as well as a recording device that's going to do that. And as Courtney said, there's plenty of Zooms that do have 32-bit. What I've mostly used are sound devices, which definitely have that range. But those are the calculations that I do, and we can't wait to hear what happens. It sounds like a
really exciting.
Great thing to record. Yeah, absolutely.
Jason.
Just one more thing just to put in the ring. I've had really good luck for extremely high SPL. In fact, I at one point did a ranch shoot with hundreds of cows, and it was deafening. I mean, I don't know if it was 130 decibels, but really we had to wear earplugs, and I ended up using I think it was a Heil snare mic. It was just designed for incredibly high SPL, and it worked beautifully.
And then just pulling in, Mickey made a comment that you can send mics into a line level input for additional padding. Next question.
Paul Walhus in Austin, Texas writes, in Canada's Online News Act, C-18 proposes that Google and Meta pay media outlets for any news content shared and repurposed on their respective social media platforms. What will be the impact?
Courtney.
There will be a lot less news in Canada. That will be the impact. Because they'll probably just black out Canada, whatever news organizations, whatever carrier doesn't want to pay the money to the news organizations will just not have it featured on their website, so it'll be blacked out, which is crazy, I think, because the value of news depreciates by the minute. So, it's not something you want to keep around, or it has long life, et cetera. So I think, they're shooting themselves in the foot to try and monetize news in that fashion.
Alex?
Yeah, the hard part is that the government is probably doesn't really have the tools. It's kind of like, asking someone who chops wood to do heart surgery. I mean, they just like, this axe is doing a lot of damage. So the government just doesn't have the kind of the fine-tuned processes to make these laws actually work. And so sure that there's, the publishers are upset about they're not making enough money. I mean, let's just get down to they're not making enough money. They're being commoditized and they're upset about it and they're pushing forward for this. But I think Facebook has already announced Google's trying to make a deal with the publishers. Facebook is already, I think, turned off their connections to them. And when that happened in Australia, it was pretty devastating. Like it happened for a little while until they worked out a deal with Facebook and Google. So the answer will probably be somewhere in between. I think that's probably what Canada's doing, is kind of forcing the issue forward. But what's happening on Facebook is that they made a deal with the publishers in Australia, And then the Canada law started going in. And what Facebook's doing over time is deprioritizing news on on the entire platform. So they're not turning it off. They're just slowly making it less and less important. And publishers have been talking about this for the last year. They're like, something's going on because we're making less. And this is why they're getting more stressed. And so these platforms can do things that are a lot more complicated than just like links or not links. They can say, well, I'm just not going to prioritize this kind of content because we've decided that it's no longer viable for our platform. But that doesn't have to be an overnight switch. And I think that that's what a lot of publishers are feeling right now, is that Facebook's slowly just winding them out of the entire platform. Probably in 2 or 3 years, you'll see almost no news on Facebook. That's going to be, it'll put a lot of publishers under and they'll wish that they had never asked for what they're getting. So that's the end product.
And Bill.
Well, having come through the reporter system back when newspapers and radio stations and everything else had standards for that, we're living in this delta between news and speculation. Most, I feel, of what we hear on TV these days and in radio is speculation rather than news. There used to be a system for vetting news and making sure that there was some accuracy at least, and that's been under attack. I do think that with the world that we live in now, where all these computer signals have the potential to carry metadata that's persistent throughout the system, there should be some way to put together a string of authenticity such that if a respected news organization, Associated Press or whomever, who has standards about verification of data, puts their tag on the original, that tag gets carried through and that they could get some micro payment from that to allow their organization to continue. I think if we don't have sources that are differentiated between speculation and news, the world gets very ugly very fast.
And Alex.
I have to say, as someone who works on a lot of events that the news that the news reports on, a lot of it's just a variable of how much speculation. It's not, there is no speculation. The stuff that I see reported on of things that I actually, I was there and I was in the middle of it, is you should take everything with a grain of salt. That's all I got to say.
Next question.
John Idelson in Monterey, California writes in, has anyone tested out podcast.adobe.com/enhance?
Go ahead, Alex.
I haven't tried it yet. I have to admit, I use the Adobe products that I really need. And there are some that are just absolutely, Substance and Photoshop are the two that I pay for. I will admit that the subscription model that Adobe has me look at every product like, eventually I'm going to be paying $10 a month for this, and so I have a tendency to not want to build it into my pipeline. But it does look interesting.
I use it and we've been using it for just quick social content that you like, stuff that has to be fine tuned and go through Adobe Audition, still do that. But this is one of those tools that is quick. I just need to clean it up. Now you need to be careful because sometimes it over processes your audio and then
do you have any dials, or is it just like you throw it in and get what you get?
Just upload and it does whatever it wants to do, and then you pick with it. But the use case is just quick, easy to do if you've got the sound in the background. So yeah, it's just something quick and easy. Courtney?
Yeah, so I guess it's a post-production process, so it can't be done on a live podcast. Because you have to upload the audio to them, let their AI work its magic in it, and download it back to cut it into your podcast. So if you're releasing it later, it would be good, I guess.
And almost everybody records. I mean, we record our podcast live, but almost nobody does. Most podcasters, I don't know if they'd be able to do that. Because when we do podcast, Twit does live recordings, and we do live recordings because I want to take Q&A, and I think that there's I think that I want the audience to be part of that interview. But most the 99.999% of podcasters just record it, and there's stops and starts and things that have to be done and things that are going to get cut out and so on and so forth.
Yeah, so this is really for the person who's looking I don't have time, or you may be intimidated. Some of those other tools are just not yet, and you do want to put out a product that will be pleasant to listen to. Might not be optimal, but it'll be pleasant to listen to. That's the user that this is going for. So it will be interesting to see in maybe 6 months to a year what else Adobe adds to that. But right now, it's a quick and easy fix. So go ahead, try it out. It's great. Next question.
Tlaloc Lopez Waterman in Brevard, North Carolina writes in, what's the best cross-platform USB NIC adapter?
Jason?
I've had really good luck with OWCs, but those are usually part of a dock. This is the redundancy. Almost all my computers are running a Dante redundancy, and this is the Belkin F2CU040. It's a USB-C to gigabit Ethernet, and I've had great luck with that.
Next question.
Todd Rains in Allen, Texas writes in, besides ZoomISO, how would you use a Deckink Duo in a Sonnet box attached to an M1 Mac Mini? By the way, I have a Mac Mini as my show computer along with my ATEM Extreme ISO.
Go ahead, Alex.
In general, that's a capture and output device. So there's a variety of things you may want to do. Like, for instance, you can have, I believe a Duo can go 4 in, 4 or out, or I think you can swap the pairs. So you can have it be 2 in, 2 out. As you know, so there's a couple different things that you can do as far as I/O goes from SDI in and out of SDI. So, for instance, you may have an application that can do a key fill output from the application. You can output the key fill out of that Duo into your switcher. So it depends on what kind of switcher you have there. But if you have an SDI switcher, you can do key fill out of it. You could also have another pair taking 2 cameras in, or you can have all 4 taking 4 cameras into your switcher. So if you're running something like Memo Live or even Ecamm, you could have those inputs go into the computer, and then you'd have 4 SDI inputs for it. So it can do a lot of I/O. In addition to that, I mean, I don't think you would do it with this, but anytime you have those cards, you can now put things like memory cards in and so on and so forth. But primarily, what you would use it for with a Mac Mini would be advanced I/O. And that could be also audio. You could put an audio card in there that did it. But if you're going to use it for ZoomISO and then sometimes for other things, then I would probably look at what you might need to put in or out. And it's not a big deal to change the inputs and outputs. It does, if you go back and forth a lot, it gets a little confusing, or you can get it into states that are a little harder to work through. But it's, in general, you can just open up its controller and just say, I want this pair to be this and this pair to be that. I don't think you can do one at a time. I think you have to take them in and out as pairs, but I almost always have them all in or all out. So I don't think of it that way.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I agree. I almost always have them all in or all out. I've also used this for MIDI. I've used MIDI, MITTI for Mac, to kind of monitor and then repeat out LTC. It's probably not the most professional way to do it, but I've had good luck with it. And so far, knock on wood, it's been really stable.
Next question.
Andy Korkendorfer in Viera, Florida writes in, just an FYI, I was recently able to remove the Powered by Zoom watermark from Zoom Live streaming by submitting a support ticket. Previously, the watermark could not be removed.
Alex.
Yeah, I think we had that on there for quite some time. So when we first got started, because there was no way to take it off. And that part of that is, for us, because we moved to ZoomISO, we don't think about it that much, because we have ZoomISO, we're going to a switcher, and it doesn't have any of those watermarks, and we're doing our own streaming. I would recommend, if you get serious about it, if it's great that live streaming capability exists inside of Zoom and someone can just turn it on and make it go. As soon as you start getting serious, you're going to find that the image quality and what you can do with it starts to go up a fair bit when you do something like ZoomISO and then send it out to a system, and you can now start adding graphics, and the actual visual quality of the Zoom participants will look better, if they have good cameras, will look better from that pipeline than the stream to YouTube.
And for our producers, this is a great time for you to add any of your questions to the queue, and making sure that you vote them up as well, because this show is driven by your question and participation. And back to the next question.
Tony Fuqua writes in from Indianola, Iowa, what is the best way to configure your studio lighting to help your subjects stand out from the background?
It's the fun one, Bill.
So the tradition in photography for many years, and it's come into video, is what's called 3-point lighting. And you're using lighting to do a 3-dimensional representation of something on a flat screen. The 3 parts of that are a key light, which typically provides most of the illumination for your subject, then a fill light, because the key light is usually not straight on. That ends up looking like driver's license photos, and it's not very satisfying. So a key light on one side coming in that is the brighter of the two lights, a fill light to bring up the shadow detail on the far side, and then another key to this is the rim light or backlight that is usually defining the shape of the person who's in the frame. So if you take those premises, the 3-point lighting premise, and bring it into your video work, it helps the subject be distinct from any background behind them. And if you start there and kind of study that and learn those 3 points, you can diverge from it and say, okay, I've got somebody in a black shirt like I am today, but I'm against a very light background. I don't really need the separation of the backlight, so you can sometimes leave that out. Or maybe you have in a circumstance like I am where my dark hair could be blending into the background, so I actually have an overhead light that you can see the shadow of now that is just helping people understand where my head stops up there so that the dark doesn't blend into the dark and I become less distinct for the viewer.
Courtney?
Yeah, Bill covered it really well about the lighting. Just try and keep your background. If you do have control over the light in the room, keep your background, half to a stop down below what your face, your foreground will be. And then use the backlight, as Bill was speaking of, or hair light from behind to get separation on the dark areas so that the parts of your face that would be down a stop or so can get a little separation between you and the background. So he covered it perfectly.
And Alex?
Yeah, and oftentimes, one of the things is to really look at the details behind them as well. So what, how much detail, and that's where a short depth of field makes a big difference as far as separating them out. Beyond lighting, that helps a fair bit to make that work. And as everybody's kind of alluded to here, make sure that your subject, if you can, is far enough away from that background that you can light it separately. Because a lot of times we get people that are right up against it, and it's very hard to control the light. So really making sure that you've got, when I'm doing an interview, I'm typically looking for 6 to 8 feet minimum to the background, unless they're in their office. And that's what you're trying to look at. And it's just never going to be as good. So 6 to 8 feet is what I consider minimum. When I start doing math, like I'll walk into a room and I'll just start rearranging. The other thing to know, when you first start doing this, you use the room the way it was, the way it arrived. Like you show up in the room and you kind of put someone behind a desk, or you use the table that's there. You can always tell someone that's done this a lot. It's because we just come in, take a picture of the room, take a picture like this is what it used to look like, and then we just move everything to where we want it to be. And so we just move everything. You just move everything to the side. You move everything in. You put everything out there. You and then you make it look the way you want it to look. And then when you're done, you pull the picture out and you put everything back to where it was. But that's the way you'll want to get. You want to be pretty aggressive about that. You can't break anything, so you have to be very careful and look at those things. And that's what an early walkthrough helps with. But a lot of times I've walked into stuff where it's the only day I'm there, and I just show up in Detroit and walk in and do an interview, and you just have to kind of figure it out.
And Jason?
Boy, great topics all the way around. The only things that I would add to that would be, if you have a short depth of field, like right now, my lens is all the way open, but you wouldn't know that because, there's a gray wall, a solid, 8 feet or so behind me. There's no point to a bokeh if your background is not interesting. And another use, or another term at least, for the overhead light is the kicker. And it's called the kicker because it kicks the foreground from the background. It adds depth and kind of shape to it. And this is very hard to learn on yourself. Have somebody, friend, girlfriend, pet, if they will hold still, sit in the chair and start moving lights and start paying attention to how that changes your subject and how they look in the frame. That's the easiest and fastest way to learn this stuff.
Next question.
Paul Walhus in Austin, Texas writes in, spatial computing is poised to be the next major paradigm for how people use computers according to soft.space. Discuss.
Courtney.
Well, I looked at this website, and it's, it has all the magic words there that they put it together. It's a paradigm shift. It's going to be the greatest thing since 3D. I'm not very bullish on spatial computing. I think anything that requires you to wear something that weighs a pound on your face is going to fail fairly quickly. We found this out with 3D when everything went to 3D, and everyone found out, well, you got to wear these glasses, and those glasses didn't weigh a pound, and people just refused to wear them. And to use it for for a game or for a brief to do spatial computing for a game or for some interactive. Oh, gee, isn't this cute? That's great. For a short time experience, but using it every day, I think most people will not adopt that as a means of doing it. I mean, HoloLens has been out for 6 years, and it's only used in very vertical market applications right now, and it's the same price as the new Apple Vision Pro. So I don't give it a lot of chance of succeeding.
Alex?
Yeah, I think we have to define whether it's a consumer device or when we talk about spatial computing, at least in the beginning, is it a consumer device or is it an industrial device? HoloLens has actually been fairly, successful in the AEC market and a couple other markets as far as visualizing, what's happening on a construction site and so on and so forth. I was kind of stunned by I put on a HoloLens and it's showing you LiDAR of every day that's coming, of where so you're getting to see things go, and you can walk around and look at things inside of an open space, and you can see, you can switch back and forth between the plan and the LiDAR and be able to figure out what's actually happening there. Super impressive. And all it was is a 30 by 30 foot room, like it was there that's in the office that they can now go to any site that's being covered that way, and they have little dogs with little LiDAR systems that run through at night. And so the main thing is that, but that visualization, this 3D visualization has been used for a long time. The first time I saw spatial computing was at NCAR, which is a National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, and that was probably 1995 or 1996, and they had a full-on it was a lot heavier than the Apple one. It was this huge, headset on, and you could, and there was a big open room that way, and you could see weather, and so it showed you weather patterns, and you could walk around. And I will say that you understood it better by looking at it and being able to walk through it and experience it as opposed to just seeing it on a screen. So there's definitely data, and it's not just that data, because later we've visualized lots of data. I have I know somebody who visualizes a lot of data. Anyway, and that data makes way more sense in 3D than it does in 2D. And so I think that we're gonna see in many, many verticals, especially after the Apple headset comes out, because it's much more desktop driven. It's much more of a computing environment as opposed to, so what we've seen so far is you put this headset on and now we're going to give you an experience. When you start adding these windows and volumes inside of a space, which is what the Apple headset is doing, you're going to it's going to be a little bit more casual use. I'm going to pick something up and rotate it around. I'm going to do this over here. I'm going to do, and those things are going to happen a little bit more smoothly. And I think over time, you're going to see spatial computing take off. In a lot of, first, it'll be in the science, industrial areas, because that's where it makes the most sense. And that's where people are going to buy the headsets. But I think you'll start to see it trickle down. And I think that, 10 years from now, it'll be used in a lot of schools.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Like, let's put this question on the calendar and come back and ask this question in a year from now. Well, a year from now specifically, only because with what Apple's doing, it's opening up what's possible, and it brought it to a consumer level. To your point, Alex, like from an industry wise, like B2B organizations, yes, this makes sense for them, but for us as everyday consumers, we need to see more. Innovation takes time.
And the thing is, a lot of times science fiction tells us something about what something might look like in the future. And if you look at, it does make a difference. If you look at the way Iron Man is a good example of sci-fi, of the original Iron Man, where he's rotating things around, he's moving that data around, he's looking at things, he's pulling them open. That's all possible, 10 years from now, and it might, some of it might be possible now, right. At when price has no limit. So those are the kind of things, and interacting with the data in 3D and in a spatial term definitely makes a difference. Like it is definitely a different experience than just dealing with it in 2D. So I think you will see an uptick. The headsets are going to get a lot lighter. They're going to get a lot, less expensive, over time. But I think what we're seeing right now is the very early, crazy versions of them as they get off the ground.
Right. Minority Report. I'll just leave it there. Minority Report, and seeing how that was 21 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's now getting closer and closer to those possibilities.
But he didn't wear headsets in Minority Report. They were on screens in front of him.
Which is much harder than that manipulation. The hand tracking is, being able to get a screen that floats without a headset.
The headsets will evolve. Next question.
Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana writes in, would an in-person meeting on Monday at the office help you end your weekend thinking and boost your team's productivity that week?
Bill?
Probably, but I've been away from offices for 25 years. That was the last time I had to go in someplace and work for somebody in their space. And so my weekend thing, I remember it, and I remember that there were pluses to it and there were minuses to it. The gathering together around the coffee machine on Monday morning and saying, how was your weekend and what happened? I will say that this office hours experience has largely replaced a good little bit of that, because the intake part here is very much like the coffee room used to be in the physical offices that I worked in. I see my friends, we have a chance to talk, catch up a little bit. If there's been a milestone, we share that. And it really does help in the person-to-person bonding to go through some form of this. So I agree with your question, Roscoe, that it's important to have that bonding experience with teammates. It does add to team cohesion. But I argue that it may not be the physical coffee machine in a space where you have to get up and negotiate traffic to get there. That is the thing that really drives that.
Alex?
Yeah, I think it depends on where you live, because if there's traffic involved, no one gets there on Monday morning, and oftentimes in a great space. So it's because they just went through whatever they went through, either driving or mass transit, and now and to do it just for an in-person meeting, especially if the team is distributed normally, that will not be seen, I think, as a great experience, like a great idea. They'll just be frustrated that they had to come in and get ready to go. And so I think that obviously I have a lot of touch bases. I'm probably in about 6 to 8 hours of meetings a day. So I'm in, and I think that for me, if I went back to physical, I couldn't do that. Like if I couldn't, because I finish up a meeting and I just drop out of one meeting, drop into the next meeting, and I didn't go to a conference. I didn't have to find conference room FA, and I didn't have to go over to the other building. I didn't have to do any of those other things. I just keep cycling through those meetings. And the biggest thing that I've learned that I had to do to be effective is I push my meetings to either side. So I push my meetings into the morning and into the late afternoon. And so there's this huge chunk of time in the middle of the day that if I, that I try to protect. I don't always protect. I can't protect it every day, but I try to protect about 3 to 4 hours a day of not meeting, and so that I can work on things. And so that's made more of a difference to my effectiveness than almost anything else, is just to not allow certain, because the problem is if you have windows in between meetings, you're not really able to think. Like I can't think that way. Like I can't have 20 minutes between a meeting or 30 minutes between a meeting and really get a lot of effectiveness done. So I need to have like an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours that are all on their own to make those things work. So I think that's good. As far as team building goes, I have found that Friday afternoon with snacks and soda and beer and things like that in the afternoon has been far more effective. Again, and it's, now people can come in if they want to or not. But I think that's more of a draw to come into the office and, work Friday afternoon or work Friday and then have a little bit of a TGIF, at the end of the day, has been really effective in a lot of companies. And I think it definitely makes a difference.
Next question.
Paul Walhus in Austin, Texas writes in, how to use hotkeys with the Insta360 Flow or Insta360 Link? Alex?
I think the only hotkeys I use are the hotkeys on the link are the ones that I can you can basically, I don't have a link plugged in right now, but basically you can cut between different views of that link. So I don't know of any other hotkeys. So if there's more, then let me know. But the only hotkeys that I use is I'll have 2 or 3 cameras plugged into one computer, and I still have to select by hand the camera, but it might have 4 or 5 different framings, and I can hotkey between those framings, and I use those often. So that's the thing that I've been most successful with.
Next question.
Henry Ramos in Yonkers, New York writes in, I wasn't aware of these newer mics similar to the Rode Wireless Go 2s, only $179 with charging base on Amazon. Has anyone tried them?
Go ahead, Courtney.
I haven't tried them yet because I have the DJI wireless mics, which are quite similar. They have this, there we go, charging base with the receiver and the two transmitters. This is what the one we're talking about, this newer $179 one. It says it has a built-in noise canceling, which sounds interesting. It's 2.4 gigahertz, and it has a DSP that is at 44.1, I think, and 16 bits. So it's only 16 bits, but it's fine. That dynamic range is enough for dialogue audio. So it should be fine for that. How it sounds, how the microphones sound is the real test of a system like this. And I don't think it does in microphone recording. I haven't seen any mention of that yet. And the nice thing about the DJI is you can hit a button on the receiver and start recording locally in each of the transmitters. So even if your signal drops out, you still have a digital recording inside the transmitter, which you can download later. So I'm not sure the Neewer has that feature though for $179. Be interesting to find out.
Oops. Yes.
Yeah, I've used a fair number of Neewer stuff. I find that the more electronics they add, the less effective they are. So the stuff that is less complicated, Neewer, I think does well. I think as they start adding more complex, like some of their lights are great, but if they start having a lot of features in the lights, then they start doing things that I don't expect them to. I just don't think that electronics has been their strong suit, so I probably would lean away from it. But I own a lot of their stuff, but I just don't find that their electronic development has been super successful so far. And maybe they're improving.
Jason.
Couldn't agree more, Alex. The more complicated Neewer gets, anything past an LED panel, and they start to slide down very quickly. I will add only this, the standard office hours disclaimer, which anytime you're doing anything wireless in the 2.4 gigahertz range, don't use it at a trade show. Like, don't use it anywhere there's any signal congestion. Do not rely on that in-unit recording. Yeah, DJI is a nice workaround. Neewer, warning, I'd spring for the better one.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael writes in, what front-end web frameworks are most popular and marketable these days? I've heard a lot about React, and it seems very well done, but I'm curious about the others.
Alex?
You have to be pretty good at web development at this point to get into the market. Like, it's a very saturated market globally. So there are, like the kind of things that, it's a very hard market to get into at this point. I would be very careful of, full stack or doing something that's specific to iOS or something that's more, like that's probably a little bit easier. The problem is that front end, web frameworks generally are going to be big teams. And those big teams, they're looking for people who have experience with big teams. And if they're not, there's so many people around the world in all different countries that are able to do what you need to do as an individual developer. So I think that I would probably not. This is you're talking years before you get years before you get a job. if you go down the front end, a web frameworks, it's not going to be something that you can do quickly.
Next question.
Unsok Dorje writes in from Dharamsala, India. During coverage of our soccer tournament, cam crews were relying on ND filter for lighting as we get clouds and shadows of the ground. A filmmaker friend suggested setting saturation. Is it practical to set saturation and change it for different situations?
Go ahead, Bill.
I would not recommend that. The point of a neutral density filter, the neutral in it, indicates that it should be affecting all the frequencies of light, therefore all the colors exactly equally. You do not want a filter that changes your color balance in any way or the amount. Now, if you're lowering the amount of light that you're letting to the sensor, it can have an effect on the perception of colors in that. So if you add a lot of ND, I can see some circumstances where you may want to adjust saturation a little bit on the back end. I would never do it on the front end. Any kind of a saturation change at the camera, you're changing what you're actually recording, and you want that to be as neutral and as pristine as possible so that you can affect these things in post, not by putting a piece of glass in front of the camera unless it's really necessary. That's my 2 cents.
Alex?
Yeah, the usually you would only want to adjust during the game. You're going to shade the camera. So the aperture is the only thing you're going to affect during a game. You're going to figure out all your colors, figure out your saturations. And there's usually, we usually have a shading unit where we're just kind of moving things up and down. And that's all you're going to want to do in general. The other thing you want to look at in overall is you probably have a wide camera that may be wide camera that's showing the whole field that might be picking up the sky. Most of the time when we're shooting, outdoor things, we try to pick a camera that's going to have, that we really have to deal with what you're dealing with. The rest of the cameras are up and kind of pointed in. I've only done one soccer game, so I don't know about the soccer games there. But in other games that we played on a pitch or some kind of field, we've had a wide shot. And one of the things that we did do, that we have done in these environments is, and this will be, you can get a gradiated filter. And what it has is a gradation. It's an ND filter that starts with 3 stops or 6 stops and fades out over time, not over time, but over distance. So what happens is you put it onto your lens, and it's actually, it will get the sky because it's an ND filter for the sky. But by the time it gets to the field, the ND filter is not there. And those are, we've typically used them as we'll put something in front of the camera to do that, but you can put it, there's ones that'll go onto your lenses as well. You wouldn't do that with all your cameras. You do it with one, and you always leave it that way. You can't shoot the field with that one. You can't move it around. That's your lock off wide. And then you would take the other cameras and you might be able to go back and forth a little bit, but the other cameras, you just don't want them to see the sky. Like, get them up high enough that they're not going to do that. You don't want to, the sky is a lot brighter than the field, and you're going to deal with that the whole game, which I'm sure you know, because that's why you're asking the question. so I would, but I think that trying to get most of the cameras off and having a wide shot that gives you, that would get you a fair bit down the road.
Jason?
Yeah, I've used a gradient ND filter with pretty good luck. The trick, as Alex said, is that you need a horizon that doesn't move, and you need it to not be on your chase cam. Also, if your friend is suggesting one of these variable ND filters where you can twist it, warning. Those are a very bad idea. It takes a lot of work to get ND filters to work really well, and when used best, they're going to give you good midtone contrast, and the rest of it kind of, doesn't or shouldn't be really toned at all. Other than that, I would be very careful.
Next question.
Andre Dole in Berlin writes in, is it possible to sort the participants list of a meeting by second name? At the moment, I always see participants sorted by first name, which I would like to change.
Alex?
In the participant list, I don't think that there's a way to do that. If you were using something like, and I think this will work, I think you can grab the participant list with Zoom shortcut, the new Zoom cuts. And so if you can, and I haven't tried to do this, but I believe you can, you could then go grab them and then give them to you in a list. You could hit a button or do a shortcut, and it would just give you the list. And it wouldn't be, I don't think inside of native Zoom, you'll be able to do that. But I think you could do it with Zoom cuts. I know you could do it with Zoom OSC. And
Jason?
Yeah, off the top of my head, with a tiny little bit of tweaking, I believe it'll take the participants list and it will just output to CSV. From CSV, of course, comma separating values, which is the simplest possible spreadsheet, and away you go. But yeah, I would need to check it. I love Zoom cuts, and I haven't tried that yet.
Next question.
Samuel Nordvik in Norway writes in, Courtney, what Mele PC would you buy if you were getting another one? Have they fixed the driver issue you mentioned on the new one? Courtney.
I think they have fixed the Quieter 3 that has the 5105 processor in it. The sound driver, the HDMI sound driver was the problem because it got stuttering. That was the issue. And I do have one that I'm using, and I don't see that stuttery issue. So I believe maybe it has been fixed. I'm waiting for the new ones to come up. There's the newer series of Alder Lake processors that have come out, the N100, I think, and they're similar to the 5105, but they're a little bit faster. And so if they can fit them into the fanless PC, I'm waiting for those to come out. I don't think they have them out yet.
And for our producers, this is a great opportunity as we get ready for our second hour. Any of those questions, those burning questions that you have for our panelists, go ahead and enter them in now. And also remember, your votes matter. So by adding your vote for a question that you really want to see or one that you're like, maybe we can use that later, go ahead and put your votes in. Next question.
Tony Fuqua in Indianola, Iowa writes in, would love to hear everyone's thoughts on the Wehead virtual presence robot. And he includes the link.
Okay, Bill.
I followed the link and I immediately started laughing and grinning and going, what is this? It is so much fun to just visit that website and see what they're trying to do. I think they want you to turn yourself into a transformer and put a fake head piece on and interact entirely as your own robot. It looks like it's so silly that it just makes me happy. I don't know whether this is a serious product. If it is, it's going to be a very controversial and interesting one. It's $2,000 for this piece of headgear, it looks like. And I kept smiling the whole time I was on the website going, this is just insane.
And Alex.
I think it's serious. They're charging $2,000 for it. I think they're really serious about this. Anyway, sorry, I'm not very serious about it. I think that it would be very weird. I think we're going to see a lot of people grapple with how do we get conference rooms to work, because more and more workers are going to, and I think you are going to end up. I think that the trajectory is you're going to end up with a lot more workers that are in pods, in something that they can go in and be in part of a virtual meeting. As more and more workers, as the workforce becomes more hybrid, and it will become more hybrid, while companies are trying to pull workers back in, the reality is that the most skilled workers are the most mobile, and they're just going to be like, as soon as I can work somewhere. I mean, a lot of them are going to go, I don't want to do travel anymore. I don't want to commute. And they're high, and so you're at risk of losing your most skilled folks that are under the most demand, and that's the real problem that companies are going to have. So they're going to have to figure out how to build these hybrid workforces, and little robots or 360 cameras with bad mics are not going to be the answer. It's not. It's just going to be weird, and so they'd rather probably just put screens up there. But eventually, what's going to happen is you'll have conference rooms when people are all having the meeting, but otherwise, I mean. And I've worked in some pretty big companies that have video conferencing tools that they made themselves. And inside of that, they do use the conference rooms and they try to use them with hybrid systems. But a lot of times they come in from very small pods, and people come in and it just makes it easier for the whole meeting to work. So I think you're going to see more of that, where workers have more tools to do it individually for meetings, because it also means that, I think that, again, if you think about big companies and big, large conference rooms, I think you have to understand the chaos around those conference rooms that occurs. We have to go over to another building because that's the only conference room that's available. And then there's people stacked up at the end of our meeting because they want to get in for the next meeting. And that's what it's like in a large corporate environment. So maybe in smaller ones, but I don't see this going anywhere. I think that I'm surprised they raised any money for this.
And Courtney?
It is quite a novelty, and we'll take a brief static look at it. It turns your head into multiple cameras on multiple flat screens onto a robotically operated neck. So you stick this little head on the table, and so your face is attached to it. It does give you one additional form of communications in that they can see you shaking your head in disgust or nodding off to sleep. That will be conveyed with this device, whereas other live things may not be able to convey it quite as fervently as this.
Next question.
Burkhard Friedrich in Isterburg, Germany writes in, due to a nerve illness, a relative has lost his voice. Is it possible to have his voice reconstructed from audio in order to use it for a future voice assistant PC software?
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, there are a few tools. I realized I wasn't able to come up with the name of the company that does these. There's like 2 or 3 different companies where you can upload those things. Now, Apple has started to build one where you can actually just talk straight into it and it will do it. But I think that this might be too late. And I don't know whether you can upload existing audio to Apple because it wants you to read certain words. So the Apple voice reconstruction is about 15 minutes of reading specific sentences, and which will work you through how you use consonants and vowels and how you stack things together, and that's what it's looking for there. So so that's part of it, but there are programs out there that will analyze lots and lots of audio and then rebuild someone's voice. It's not perfect, but it's not bad.
And Bill?
Yeah, I think Alex covered it all. I was interested in the Apple thing, but it's really under their disability umbrella, and they're looking for people who are facing something. I mean, God forbid, throat cancer or something like that, where your voice is going to go away, and they want to be able to memorialize what you sounded like through the course of your life. It's fun and interesting, and hopefully very helpful for that subset of people who need that initiative.
Yeah, very real use case. Jason?
Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear that this happened. I'm going to answer your question with a question. Do you have good recordings of this person before they lost their voice? If so, there's a great chance that if, the perfect thing doesn't exist yet, it will very shortly. And I'm sure that Preto has a short list.
John?
The one that we use is called 11 Labs, and we took a video from Courtney off of his YouTube channel, and then just by running, I don't know, the video was him showing off one of his products. It was like 8 minutes long or something, and it reproduced Courtney pretty well. So that's the one of choice that we've been using.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael writes in, I've noticed that French and Spanish announcements in airports and other public spaces often are in a female voice. Why is that?
Courtney?
I think there's been a lot of psychological testing on this, and it's been determined years ago that the female voice cuts through, and people pay more attention to it because their mothers shouted them at it as a child, and so they pay attention more to a female voice. This is why a lot of dispatchers at police stations are usually females, because their voice will cut through the clutter and of the other voices that are on the frequency at the same time. This is with more inclusion and more women police officers out there. This is, there's a lot more to cut through, and it's not going to stand out as much. But that's why I think it's more pleasing to the ear, as well as it cuts through noise a little bit better because of the higher frequency register that travels further for announcements in public places.
Jason?
Yeah, I don't think there's only one answer for this, but I'm going to stick with physics. A female voice is easier to amplify, carries farther because it's a higher frequency.
Next question.
Paul Wall, who's in Austin, Texas, writes in, what is the agenda for today's all-hands Siggraph planning meeting at 1 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Central?
The Siggraph planning meeting.
Sorry, I didn't get my hand up. I was trying to figure out the time because I had 11 a.m. So we'll see if it will be if there was a meeting sent out, we'll make it happen. But I had an 11 a.m. for that meeting. So we'll, I think that Brian and I, in the time zones, things got moved around, I think. So if it's 1 p.m., I'll be there for that. Basically, we're going to talk about how we're going to cover Siggraph. So we know we're covering Siggraph. I think in Cinegear, we had some uncertainty about what our access would look like and how it would look, but we're not worried about Siggraph. And so what we want to do is we're pulling together the team. I think that I posted in Discord a link that if you're interested in being on the team, either offsite or onsite, you can sign up for it. And so I would highly recommend being in this first meeting if you're interested. We'll leave it open for a couple of weeks and then we'll close it up. But there's a 3-day conference. I think right now what we're thinking about, and we'll keep evolving, but I think that what we're looking at right now is 2 hours each day. So instead of having a day where we do all after hours, I think what we're looking at now is doing 2 hours of live broadcast each day. That way we can error correct between each day. So we go, oh, this was a little bit better, or let's do this a little bit this way. And so there'll be a little bit shorter runs. We'll probably do HDR and 5.1 testing between, around those as well. So those won't be part of the mainstream, but they will be there. And we may get them in the mainstream. The main thing that I've had with the HDR is that it hasn't, I feel like the tone mapping hasn't been perfect. And so that's been the reason that we haven't done it that way. We are looking at possibly getting some booth space. So we're still working on that. We should know that in the next week or two. And then if we get booth space, we're looking at getting internet. And the big thing there is that if we get internet at a booth space, it really will change what we can do at the show. So now we can have a desk space. And what's interesting is that we're not looking at what we're looking at is having a desk space that has 2 or 3 cameras, but only one person. So the person, one or 2 people, but it's the vendors or the people we want to interview are going to be looking at the panel. So the panel is the interviewers. The host, quote unquote, host at the desk will actually be the panel if we can pull this off. So we're, and then we have the live view. The live view has been set up with multiple cameras now, so we've got that all working. So the live view can work out there. We'll also have some tear decks to kind of roam around. So I think it's going to be another step forward in the coverage that we've been doing. So it's going to be interesting to see how that, I think it could be really good. And so Raj is doing the on the ground, and Brian is doing the kind of the in the cloud overview of this process. One thing we've decided is there's always got to be producers before we start saying we're going to cover something, and those producers cannot be me. So anyway, so I'm really excited. I mean, now Raj and Brian have seen a couple of these shows inside and out. So they're the ones that are really working on the design, but we're going to start meeting every week.
So amazing and exciting. And there's a video that I saw recently on LinkedIn. I think, John, you might have shared it with Andy Carluccio and Richard Lavery. And they were the screens in the booth. And I think there was a correspondent or a host. Is that kind of what you're saying, Alex? Because I was trying to visualize.
We won't cut it. I mean, you'll just see them. You'll see us, okay. And then there'll be a window that they're looking at into it. So we're not trying to do any kind of screens or anything else there. You're just literally the person who wants to show you something, whether it's a computer graphics program or a device or whatever, is going to be sitting at the table. They're going to be looking at a teleprompter. And so we'll see we'll just see behind them, but we're not cutting to any wide shots. They're just here at the stage, and we might have a wide shot that shows you what's happening. The big thing is I want to put cameras over top and kind of close up so that we can basically if they're showing something, we can get close-ups of that and show how that works. And so that's the thing that we're really kind of working through that's the innovation there. But the idea is to pull their interest or pull them right to us. But I'm not having them try to look at the screens, Gotcha. And it makes it a much more compact setup at a booth. I don't think we're going to have a lot of booth space. And it makes it much more compact. It also drives their attention towards the panel. And in this case, we will have a very low latency connection to the if we get the booth space and if we get the internet there, it'll be pretty straightforward.
Courtney?
I don't know about at Siggraph. It's been a while since I've been to Siggraph, but last time I went, most of the things that are shown at Siggraphs are computer systems or software systems tightly integrated with hardware that do specific stuff. And I don't think any of them are portable enough to bring out to another booth. That's the thing. That's what I would worry about, that setup that you're describing.
It's only that would be only one of three ways that we're covering the event. So it would be in a 2-hour break. It'd be 2 or 3 people. There's definitely going to be things at Siggraph that we can show. It doesn't have to be, but the vast majority of it's still a live view or the Teradeks or both. Roaming around. So we'll be still roaming around, doing all the roaming around that we did before. It's just that we will have we'll have the booth. And what's nice is we'll be able to go back to that desk, and it gives us a breath to get somewhere else and so on and so forth. So I think it'll be useful.
And just to pull in, so what they're saying, the producers in the comments, they think that the confusion is on the time is that Discord automatically adjusted the time for everyone. So for example, the meeting shows up at 2 p.m. for them. So just we'll get that sorted out on their end. Good old.
Anyway, so yeah.
Good old Discord. Well, we're moving right along into our getting ready to get into our second hour as we get into food content. Ryan Hinkson of Eat Famous will be speaking with us, and super excited because just from the times that we've had our brainstorm sessions, and especially on Mondays when we cover things of like the business of marketing, content, innovation, and having a significant number of influencers and leaders in the space, to have someone who has been able to, start their Instagram account and growing that to roughly over 230,000, followers, and really building community. So I'm looking forward to getting into this conversation so we can get like really the behind the scenes and nitty gritty. Good morning, Ryan. How are you? Welcome to Office Hours.
Good morning, Liv. How are you doing? Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. And so I recall, I think it was Shirley with the Black Canadian content creators. And she would always say like, Ryan from Eat Famous, Ryan from Eat Famous. And I'm like, what am I missing out on? Right. And then I saw your account. I got a chance to meet you. And I was like, oh, Ryan from Eat Famous. So talk to us about the evolution. Like, where did Eat Famous come from? And a little bit more about yourself as a food culturalist. Culturalist.
Yes. So I am a food culturalist. Probably a title or a job description that many people aren't familiar with. And I actually love that because I feel like when your job title is something that people don't know exactly what it is, no one can ever tell you you're doing it wrong or that you're doing a bad job. But basically, what most of my days look like is it starts with me creating content. I primarily use Instagram. I have an Instagram account called @EatFamous, just over 285,000 followers. I do focus on the city of Toronto as that's where I'm based out of, but I also travel a lot and create content globally. I work with a lot of restaurants and brands on creating digital content for them, whether that's content that's going to live on my account or things specifically for them to use in their marketing and branding as well. I've worked with a lot of local and restaurants that Toronto has really embraced and loved over the years. And I've also had the ability or the opportunity, I should say, to work with a lot of brands like Google, the Toronto Raptors, NFL Canada, Hudson's Bay, McDonald's, Burger King, Domino's, on creating some fun social content.
So if you can, you threw a term out there for us, a food culturalist.
Yes.
Can you break that down for us? And you shared, let's start there, just breaking that down and what that means.
So I think it's a constantly evolving type of job and term because the field that I'm in is always constantly evolving and changing. Primarily what I do is I try to tell the story of food. So not just what's going to pop up on the plate, but, trends, what's happening, who's influencing it, who are some of the unsung heroes of the food world that are, creating things and, why things show up on plates, why food around the world and around this city is so different and so important. And just, using the power of digital and community to not only share, again, the delicious things that I get to eat, but the stories of those people who make it possible for us to do so.
So where you are right now and to when you actually started, like what was the moment that you said, you know what, I want to try capturing stories of food and the people behind it. Like what has someone start doing that?
Yeah. So at first, it was really just collecting content, creating content, collecting photos and posting videos of my food adventures. The account wasn't front facing. When I say front facing, I mean, I wasn't even showing myself. Like there was no real personality to the account. It was just these really, amazing shots of like very indulgent food. Sometimes there may be a burger with like 10 patties or a slice of pizza that, you could sleep comfortably underneath. But what I realized is as the community started to grow, followers and the people that I was meeting with, they really wanted to know, okay, yeah, that looks incredible, that looks delicious, but who made it? Or is that really good? And then I noticed that the story behind, the whys really started to captivate people. And then also when a lot of brands that I grew up as just a customer of started reaching out and, not just asking me to highlight them or take photos, but really help kind of, capture what I felt about their products and their services. So that's what led me to understand that people are very interested in story.
Sorry, we have a lot of, just even in the office hours community, there's a lot of foodies.
Okay.
Alex is a food connoisseur as well, but just
Right.
even breaking down how you tell that story, and you, to your point, you said trends, and I recognize, like, even just going through your account and how you are, like, sometimes there are moments where you, like you said, you're talking through, or you're doing like a live review, and then there are moments where it's just possibly like trending audio, and then you're just taking some bites. Can you talk us through that process for yourself of coming up with your content calendar, and how you're actually tracking what hits and what doesn't, and how
Right.
much of that is like, no, I know what it is, and it's like,
Yeah.
no, the people have said it.
Right. So there's myself, there's the people, and then there's also a looming third party that wields a lot of influence. And whether that's, Instagram or the algorithm, every creator today, I don't have any hair, but, is constantly pulling out their hair, trying to figure out how to, to grow and to capture audience, and to even, retain the attention of a large audience that you spent some time to cultivate and grow. A lot of it, I feel it feels like muscle memory. I've definitely been doing this for quite some time. I would say about 8 years now, professionally. And I think it's having an awareness of what people are responding to a degree, but then also reminding yourself about what you did when no one was paying attention. That obviously got you some attention, because a lot of times, you mentioned the trending audio thing, and that's definitely something I use, because, we're told that these are the things that people are responding to. So there's quite a balance. It's funny, I always draw in food analogies. So when I think of like, a server at a restaurant with a whole bunch of plates stacked, and they're trying to balance it. So, it's part my creative vision. It's part what I feel that my audience wants to see and will respond to. And then, there are certain parameters that are shaping the way that creators are producing content, because as these social platforms grow, and as they definitely are more driven by, their ad revenue, they want things to look and feel a certain way. So it's like, yeah, definitely a lot of balance and trial and error, a lot of error sometimes, but just, also keeping it going.
I've got like 2 quick questions before I get to our panel and their questions. And producers, it's a great opportunity for any questions that you may have for Ryan around food, content creation, and just even the community side. And so you mentioned that part of the reason, like even coming on office hours and sharing your story, is that if you had someone to like help with that blueprint and figuring it out, what would, if you were to say like one important tip or that you've seen for anyone who's looking to get started in content creation, food, specifically a niche, a niche area, what would that advice be, or the learning that you're like, this did not work in the beginning, run away, don't do that?
So I would say, first off, don't be afraid to ask questions. When I first started, there were a couple of really, really large food accounts that existed. And in my mind, I always wanted to know how they would do certain things, whether that was like from a technical standpoint, or just, looking at growth, or I don't want to say manipulating, but maneuvering through this very, very new platform. And coming to meet those individuals, I found that like people are, I think, a lot more willing to answer questions and share advice than we think they are. I was watching the show prior to jumping on, and I just marvel at how much great free-flowing information we have these days. And I think a lot of times when you're new in a space, you don't think that you've earned the right to approach someone. And I mean, without sounding kind of funny about it, most people that are creators or sharing in a digital space want to be seen. They want to be asked things. They want to be, kind of regarded as experts. And it took a long time for me to build up the confidence to start to just ask people, hey, how much do you charge for this? Are you being paid for this? Why does your background look better than mine? What camera are you using? All these kind of things that I kind of, I felt like I wasted a lot of time kind of figuring things out on my own, rather than, looking to the leaders in my field and just trying. Because I know for myself, I willingly answer and try to mentor young and up and coming creators in my space.
So ask questions. Don't be
Yes.
afraid to ask questions.
Mhm.
The question I have for you is community.
Yes.
How that you've gotten to somewhat of like a very decent and admirable scale. How are you managing community? What does that entail for you to keep people engaged?
Mhm. So I think even speaking to what I closed with, being very, very open to, no, not all of my followers or everyone in my community aspires to do what I do, but being accessible. You know, if someone is asking a question, I try to reply to every single comment, DM. Sometimes it may take long if something's doing really well, and you know, there's a lot. But I'm very big on the fact that you know, I created this for a community, for an audience. So I don't see myself as some figure that looms above that. I feel like I'm in it. You know, I'm often collaborating with my peers. I do a lot of work with other creatives, and I find that a lot of times my best work comes when I'm you know, working with others that I follow, that I admire. So those are really, really, really big things. And then just being out there, you know, especially coming out of the pandemic, with the ability to revisit restaurants and, you know, support local causes and just really being involved, it is a big help. And then, you know, obviously what I do captures that. So making sure it's out there.
Alex.
I had a couple questions. It's really great to have you here. Thanks so much for your time. So how are you primarily all Instagram, or how do you interact with the different various platforms that you might have available to you?
Right. So primarily Instagram. I do have a presence on TikTok as well. It's funny because I remember years ago when I kind of sensed that TikTok was a place to be. But I was like, I don't know how to dance like these kids, so I'm not going to open a TikTok account. But being you know, I think available to not just your core audience, but other potential audiences and pools of people or businesses, it's vital. You know, I get posed the question all the time, hey, you've got this great following on Instagram, but what if, you know, tomorrow you wake up and the app's disabled, or it's gone, or, you know, it's lost its popularity? What do you do next? So, you know, I've had to, you know, I think, you know, there's a tendency when you do well in a really specific space or field, you want to kind of stay there. You know, you feel like you figured it out, it's comfortable, but you know, growing and kind of stepping into other waters is very important. So I've definitely actually been recently really working at trying to be more visible on TikTok and other platforms, and just also staying abreast of what may be next, right? Because I'm sure the next big thing, no one's even heard of yet. So, yeah.
Yeah. And how do you interact with both TikTok and Instagram? So use Instagram to send people over to TikTok and let people know, so that that's always the challenge, is figuring out how do you put the same content on both of them, or do you use TikTok to tell people that there's something on or use Instagram to tell people that there's something on TikTok?
Right. So exactly. So that's primarily when I first started having a presence on TikTok. I tried to use Instagram to migrate people over, and also to let them know, hey, I'm not just there, but you may get a slightly different experience. Although both platforms primarily, you know, kind of are looking to serve the same audience, and like they, you know, provide like a similar experience, there's vast differences. And so I do find that the easy thing would be to just repurpose content from, you know, one to the other. But I do notice that there's things that, and I look at scale, so not just the number, because I have a larger number on Instagram, but I notice there's some things that they perform very well on one platform versus the other. It can be very tough creating, you know, 2 or 3 versions of the same content for different platforms. But you do have to be mindful of you know, where you're playing and tailor it as best as you can.
You find that it's really important to really generate native content. I mean, oftentimes I see Instagram folks will put stuff on that's obviously Instagram on TikTok, and you immediately go, oh, come on.
Right.
Like, you know.
Yeah. And if I also know that like the platforms themselves, they don't like that. Right. You know what I mean? Like, I used to see, you don't see so much of it now, but well, actually, no, you still do. A lot of times on Instagram, you're seeing videos with like that TikTok watermark on there. And I know from some discussions I've been privy to, like Instagram will not send as many of those out. Like, I mean, if something's killing it and going viral, then of course they're going to share it, but they'd rather have something creative natively in app, right? On both sides.
And you know, we're a bunch of gearheads. What are your tools? What do you use to generate your content?
So primarily for myself, I heavily rely on my phone. I've always been teetering on, do I need to level up in terms of like my primary source of capturing for like, using cameras. And I remember for a time I did, and I just didn't have the same personal level of comfort. Mm-hmm. Also, I think it's really dependent on like the type of content that you create. On Eat Famous, it's a lot of like very indulgent, over the top stuff. And I find a lot of times a very close up shot that I can just like kind of stick the phone right in front of the food or the subject, yields the best result. When I was doing that with the camera, it didn't have the same feeling. I use, like some handheld, like newer lights. Depending on, we're in Toronto, so we're subject to like 23. Well, I'm in Toronto, I should say, subject to like 20 different seasons of weather a day or a week sometimes. So there may be times where, I'm using things to just like block shadows and, things of that nature. But for myself, it's a fairly simple and approachable setup in terms of gear for myself. Yeah.
I know I was on air in Toronto. I was up there once a month for years, and you're in the perfect place to do food. Like it is just like, it is
Yes.
one of the best food cities in the world. Just the diversity is just insane.
It is.
When you look at, by the way, what phone?
Sorry. An iPhone Pro Max. Yeah.
13, 14?
13 currently, but I've actually been seeing some great images coming from the latest Samsung, and I've been blown away. And like any of my friends that are Team Samsung, they're going to relish this. I'm sure they're probably going to be recording or screenshotting this right now and playing it back to me when we kind of go at each other. But I can't lie, I have been considering a switch, which seems to be outperforming currently.
And when you think about building the content, how does the algorithm affect the way that you approach how you make the content, what you choose for content, et cetera?
Right. So in terms of like what I capture, doesn't really change too much. So I kind of have a mix of restaurants and foods that I love or that I want to try. And then also really trying to stay on top of food trends, those spots that people are speaking about. So where I go and what I do doesn't vary too much, which is funny because you see it with restaurants where a lot of new restaurants are very driven by being appealing to social media content and capturing. But when it comes to actually creating it, I feel like, and Lib had mentioned this in a question, that, sometimes it might be me speaking about the experience. Other times it's just some trending audio. I feel like if the content, speaks for itself, then maybe I may pull back in terms of how much I'm, speaking on it or, doing a voiceover on there. Whereas if it's something that is new and I feel like, oftentimes I may have the privilege of going to a restaurant before it opens. So like when the NBA courtside restaurant opened, I got to go a couple of weeks before its public opening. So something like that, I'm definitely going to give a lot of like statistics and information, when it's opening, what the menu is going to be like, who's the chef there, what was driving it. If there's already been a decent amount of conversation about somewhere, then I might try to let my imagery or how I put the content together speak as opposed to myself.
There was this pizza one that you had, and exactly when you said that, I instantly could see how you shifted based on that. Like, let the food is the star of the content and what people are looking for. Jason?
So I will echo the welcome very much to our little community. I'm curious, when you said phone only, my immediate thought was, has he tried a phone gimbal? Have you?
Oh, yes. I have, and it's still, for the majority of the time, lives in the box. I've watched a ton of videos. So if anyone has a recommendation on like a very basic beginner video on how to properly use it, I mean, I understand the basics of it, but I find like, I don't know if it's a lack of coordination, but I'm not getting what I see other people getting from using that device. So a lot of times, I really just try to steady my hand. It's a lot of taking the same shot over and over. But I do definitely have a phone gimbal. Yes, it's a little dusty.
All right,
we are
Jason.
definitely your place for that. I've got one more if it works.
Definitely.
So, which of your projects were you skeptical of at first that ended up, wildly exceeding your expectations, as far as audience participation or something?
So I've got a great answer for this, because although it happened a couple of years ago, I remember being so nervous. So I've had the good fortune of having a large account for a while. So a lot of the work I get comes into me. But every now and then, I will pitch to brands or restaurants if I feel like there could be some synergy, or if it makes sense in my mind that we work with one another. So very early on, because like I said, I use a lot of indulgent type foods as my subjects. I was thinking to myself, I was actively courting McDonald's, but not in like the typical McDonald's way. What I would do is I would go with friends and like buy a whole bunch of burgers and like make my own kind of like creations from McDonald's. And I would post them and tag them. No response, no follows, no likes, no comments, nothing from them. And then I had a friend who had a close relationship with some folks at the marketing team there. And I said, hey, I've actively been trying to like get their attention. Do they know me? Can you ask someone? And he came back and he's like, yeah, they know you, but they were actually trying to move towards, having their products be perceived as a lot more healthier as, the opinion goes of them, right? So I was like, okay, I got it. So I stopped like making these crazy McDonald's concoctions. But a couple months after, I got invited to an event by a friend of mine who was one of their ambassadors. So I went to an event at their head office and, just met people, spoke to some folks in their marketing department. And a couple of weeks later, I get an email saying, hey, we would love to work with you. So I was like, yes, success. I've done it. I've kind of like snagged the big dog in terms of the fast food world. But then I started to get nervous because I remember I had built my fan base going to, spots that like weren't like a McDonald's, so, like burgers that may have been grounded, like fresh every day. And, these darlings of like a scene that, was emerging where people were like really more into kind of like I don't want to say like a boutique style burger, but like, there's a lot of spots in Toronto, like Rudy, Burger Drops, Fully Chuck, that like specialty burger thing. And I was like, oh, wow, is my audience going to think I'm selling out? Sorry, Jason, a long way to finish a great
No,
question.
I love this answer. Go ahead.
So I was like, my audience is going to think I'm selling out. Like, how much more corporate in the food world can you get than McDonald's? And also because they're such a large corporation that measures exactly everything they do, they have a laundry list of rules. Whereas when I was working with these mom and pop places, they're like, hey, Rye, go for it. Just run, do whatever you think works best. So I was like, how am I going to maintain the creativity with these constraints, and then also have my audience appreciate what I'm doing? Because I can already sense the skepticism. So I almost started like regretting the fact that I had actively courted them. But I just dug really deep and found a way, I think, to, serve kind of both needs. And the campaigns actually did surprisingly well. There was definitely a lot of folks saying, hey, like, I can't believe you eat this stuff, but it resulted in a long partnership and some great content. So yes, sorry, a very long-winded answer, but yeah.
But an important
works.
one, because the thought of like, if I go this route, that's selling out. So thank you for, the authenticity with that. And we'll go with Courtney before getting to our producer questions.
Good to see you here, Ryan. A lot of food sites, I'm a sucker for food. And almost all the food sites that I like to go to are comfort food, the high calorie thing, the high calorie items that look so delicious and all that lovely tasting grease. Ooh, cheese. Oh, I'm sorry for that. But is there such a thing as a health oriented or diet oriented groups on the Instagram that are food sites that concentrate on the rather than how to, satisfy your palate, how to satisfy your waistline?
Yeah. Hey, Courtney. That's a great question, because if you take a look at my account, we're brothers, because that's definitely the kind of stuff I love. Comfort food, cheese is one of my best friends. But yeah, there are definitely a lot of accounts that serve that niche. But a great thing too is what I've found is a lot of creators, and even myself, although it may not be apparent with just a quick glance at my account, is I do try to inject a little bit of realism, because I mean, if you looked at the account, people are always asking me, how do you eat like that? Like, this is impossible. I think what's lost sometimes is, we forget that with these social platforms, the creator gets to decipher or, decide on how much you see and when. So it might look like every day I'm going to town with poutines and cheese fries and stuff like that, but I'm not. So a lot of times when I'm getting that question, how do you eat like this? How are you not 10,000 pounds or whatever may come through? Every now and then I'm throwing a story up of myself, making a smoothie, having the salads, all the things that I do daily, honestly, that allow me to indulge when it is time to create content. So you get the full spectrum. You've got folks that are completely dedicated to, very healthy, perfect lifestyle type of accounts. And then, you've got folks like myself who may share the odd indulgence, but then are cognizant of the fact that, a little bit of everything and balance helps as well.
Wonderful answers. All right, Jason, let's get into it.
You got it. Paul Walhus in Austin, Texas writes in, why Houston? Why not Austin, Elgin, Lockhart, etc.? When do you return to Texas?
Well, I hope to get back to Texas very, very soon. I went because I was actually working with Houston Board of Tourism. So highlighting that city to my follower base, primarily the folks in Toronto. I had an incredible time. And it's funny that, that question pops up, because I've thrown up a reel that it's still doing pretty well. Still we're about 5 million views and, hundreds of thousands of likes and a lot of love. But it was based on my recommendation for the top 5 barbecue spots in Houston. But along with that love came a lot of hate, a lot of debate, a lot of very angry Houstonians, a lot of angry Texans who felt like, Houston is not the mecca of barbecue. So it caused a lot of discussion, which was great, which is probably why it's doing so well on IG, because, there's a lot of chatter going on. But I definitely hope to be in Texas soon. It far exceeded my expectations, I have to say.
When something like that happens, where you see it's engagement nonetheless, yes, because they're commenting, yes, do you follow up with something equally as, or maybe space it out and bring that back? Like, how do you navigate that when you see a trigger?
Right. So it's, I think the first instinct is to jump back on it and try to recreate that exact same magic. A lot of times you won't see that immediately pan out. Sometimes, like, even for an account as large as mine, those type of occurrences, when you're just getting that super viral thing, it's not a weekly occurrence for myself, right? It just, a lot of times, that thing, even I think a parallel kind of thought is, it's not even just recreating the ones that have done well. So you're trying to get that again, that exact response or reaction again. A lot of times the things that I think are going to kill out the gate don't do as well. I had a video from that same trip where there's an alligator on a spit being roasted, and I thought everybody would go wild for that, like that visual of the alligator, because it's just so striking. And again, I thought there would be thousands of people saying, "Oh my gosh, did you eat that?" Or "That's crazy, that's disgusting." And it did fairly well, but nowhere near just, "Hey, these are my top 5 barbecue spots." So I think you got to just kind of go at it organically. I mean, it would be silly to ignore the possibility of saying, "Hey," exploring and like deep diving into what you did and saying, "Hey, is there something here? Is this maybe, what the next wave of my thing should be like?" But expecting a hit on social every time is very difficult.
Next question.
Rajan Chandil in Los Angeles, California writes in, do you do any social media marketing to help attract new audience members?
I have done that in the past. And it's tough to measure sometimes because, there's times of like a lot of growth, and a lot of times I can deliberately attribute that to content. And then there's times where I don't know if I feel like maybe just the Instagram gods are serving me new followers. So I'm personally, I guess, at a place where, although I'm not satisfied with it, I would love to have 1 million followers. I'd love to have 10 million followers. But I'm more focused on like high quality content than trying to grow per se. Or at least growing in that way, because I find that like a lot of my peers that would be maybe defined as like micro influencers or have smaller niche followings could be doing just as well, because with a number as large as mine, the truth is you're still only really able to impact or reach or even interact with a small number of folks. So growth isn't always it's not as much of a prime concern as it used to be for me.
Next question.
Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana writes in, who's been your biggest encourager and what did they teach you?
Oh, wow. That is a great question. I think my biggest encourager would be my wife. So when I first started this, I was working for a corporation I had worked for many, many years, a very large, well-known corporation. And although, I'd had some great experiences, built some great relationships, it wasn't truly me. So Eat Famous had functioned as like a side hustle for a couple of years while I was there. And then it felt like I had 2 9-to-5s because I was putting equal or probably more effort into growing and working through Eat Famous. And I was making money as well with Eat Famous as sort of a side gig. And I remember when I just felt kind of burnt out and I wasn't in love with my corporate job. And it was my wife that said, "Hey, you've been doing this thing that has been serving you and has created some joy and some incredible opportunity. And you're really, really good at this. Why not do that?" And I remember, having a family and just, having that comfort of my job probably instilled a lot of fear of, leaving it or shaking things up. And I know I was probably ready to have made the switch and work for myself much earlier than I did. I mean, I've been at it on my own for a couple of years, and it's the best decision I ever made. But I definitely have to credit her with being that first person to say, really go for it.
Next question.
Dave Troutman in Edmonton, Canada writes in, what approach do you take to encourage people to be adventurous and try new foods?
Oh, you know what it is? It's definitely trying things that, like, if you ask the people that know me best, trying that from like being scared or vulnerable on social in the moment. When I'm trying, I've had like beetle stew. I've had a lot of things that people would probably be quite squirmish about. So I think a lot of times if I can do it, and it's funny, I was a very picky kid growing up. I ate like 1 of 5 things at any given time, like no more than that. So a lot of folks that knew me when I was younger, very surprised that like even some of the things that aren't quote unquote that outrageous, they're just like, wow, you used to be very, very picky. So a lot of times if I can jump on and show people that, hey, you only live once, or, if it's not going to kill you, why not try it? So I I think and there's no other way to convince people to be adventurous, but to be adventurous yourself in front of them.
Next question.
Rajan Shandil in Los Angeles, California writes in, what are your favorite social food channels, contents, and cookbooks?
Oh, wow. Okay. My favorite cookbook currently, and it's funny, we're heading back to Texas. Texas and I have a thing. There's a great cook, Chef Scotty Scott, and he's got a cookbook called Fix Me a Plate. So a lot of, Southern staples. There's a lot of soul food in there. So, like chicken and waffles and great cornbread recipe, peach cobbler, things like that. That book has been great. And there's also a book called Yad, and Yad is slang for like home, so Jamaican slang for like home, whether it's the island or your own home. That's by a chef originally from Toronto named Adrian Forte. So those are two books that I'm loving right now. In terms of accounts, oh wow, I could go on forever and ever and ever. There's so many great food accounts in Toronto and abroad that I follow. And of course, now I'm going to draw a blank because, I've been asked the question. But there's an account called The Six Eats, a local Toronto-based one that I love. Let me start with the Toronto folks. Mark Teo, Teo's Finest is an incredible account if you're looking for great food in Toronto. Oh, wow. There's so many.
That's a good start too, because I had a friend who was on a podcast and, you're on the spot. And then she's like, oh, I should have said all these people. We don't want you to have any enemies. So that's a good place there. But even with Rajan's question, like even where do you draw inspiration as you prepare? Like you kind of told us about the trends, but how do you even decide this is what I'm going to cover?
So you know what? When I see something that so it's funny. There's a production company based out of Toronto called Royce Visuals, and they do incredible work. So whenever they go to a restaurant before me, I'm like, I throw my hands up because I'm like, how am I going to compete with what they do? Because their method of capturing things is just it's incredible. It feels like you're watching a movie like every time, but that drives me. You know what I mean? Because now I'm going in knowing that a good portion of my audience, because a lot of the top accounts share followers, has seen the food presented this way. So it really makes me want to up my game and think about how I am going to not only show this in a manner that's true to myself, but in a way that, knocks people's socks off, that makes them pay attention because I know it's already been covered and somebody's done a great job of doing so.
Awesome. Next question.
Robert Sabade in Piastov, Poland writes in, what makes you choose photographic content over video content? And to complicate the question, when do you choose to tell your own story over allowing someone else to tell theirs?
Oh, that's actually a great question. So I will say I've definitely moved more towards video as, posting reels on Instagram is going a lot further. I built the account on photos, so it's definitely been tough for me to move away from that, especially because I feel like the style that really, really worked for me actually is oddly best captured in a still photo. But if you do look at the account, it's definitely gravitated to more video content. And to follow up, sorry, could you just remind me of the second part of the question? That was actually a really great part of it. I just want to make sure I get it.
Choosing to tell your own story over allowing someone else to tell theirs.
Oh, right. So that's actually a fantastic question. I think it really depends on the who and what. A lot of times I go to restaurants where whether it's the food or the chef or the owner or the staff there, that they're so interesting, they're so passionate. I just know that the camera will love them. And a lot of times, or if it's a food that just you can't keep your eyes off, I will definitely, have no issue letting those people or that thing shine. There's sometimes where my reaction or my experience is the story, right? And I think it comes naturally. For myself, I'm a big believer in like over capturing content there. I'd rather spend, hours there and having a long kind of tedious editing process, but not missing anything, as opposed to going in with a single focus, which can be much more effective, of course, but then, having that kind of remorse afterwards, thinking, oh, wow, why didn't I spend more time talking to this person, or that I didn't get this cheese pull from that perfect angle. So a lot of times I kind of just take in everything I've captured and see what best fits.
How long did it take for you to find your style based just even listening to this question by Robert? It's like, oh, but then it's also your style, because you mentioned that mobile has been your choice because there's just an ease of use and a fluidity. And you really do have a dynamic presence when you're, displaying and sharing your story about the food. So what was that like?
So early on, because I started Eat Famous, I don't want to say accidentally, but I was doing something else. I was working on another business idea with a friend of mine that required that I be in restaurants a lot and take some photos. So as I was personally discovering Instagram, my mind just told me, hey, you know what, we're working on this food related business idea. Let's start getting to some of this content up, because people are sharing a lot of food content recently. So I at first I would say that, like, if it was a cheesesteak or a cheesecake, you would have a hard time deciphering what I was posting. Like, I was using probably an iPhone 3, it was very grainy. I didn't know that, you could bring lights with you if lighting wasn't optimal to a space. So it was really just me seeing accounts that I liked and not mimicking them, but like understanding what it is I liked about them. And I was always just drawn to images that felt like you could reach through your screen and like grab them or taste them. That right away, they kind of like poke you or like slap you in the face and wake you up. So once I got better in terms of my execution, I kind of leaned into that. And then I also just was able to really tell what people were responding to, because at first it was a lot of just like, throwing stuff at the wall and seeing if it sticks.
Great. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael writes in, do you think that partnering with content creators could be beneficial for driving traffic to restaurants?
Oh, 100%. And I don't say that because I am a content creator, but I've seen the difference. I feel like I do run social media for a handful of restaurants locally in the area. So I've seen the difference, and not attributing it to myself, but I think any capable content creator who understands your brand can definitely help. Also because, this function is it's not old, right? Like this necessity to have a presence on social media is kind of something that's been thrust or forced upon, new businesses over the last couple of years. And a lot of times, especially in the restaurant space, if you're just opening, you're doing so much, right? There's a lot of work. And if you can have someone who can capture that, I think it definitely makes sense to do. I've seen the rewards, not only for my own clients, but for restaurants throughout the city.
Next question.
Rajan Shandil writes in from Los Angeles, which food have you filmed, and after you filmed it and ate it, can't stop dreaming about eating again and again and again?
Great question. Recently, I went to a restaurant in Toronto called Miss Licklemore, and they do what's called a mac pie. So it's like, my family's from Barbados, so I'm going to say a Bayesian version, but a lot of folks in the Caribbean, Trinidad especially too, make mac pie. So it's similar to like mac and cheese, but it's a little more like kind of like in a casserole. It's not as like creamy as they say a traditional mac and cheese. And it's my favorite food. It's the thing that like my folks always make sure is on the table whenever I go home to eat. But they do a version with braised oxtail on top of it. And since I had it about 3 weeks ago, and I've already been plotting or planning my next trip there. It's such incredible dish. Incredible.
I saw that video and I was like, that's on my radar sometime, summer, fall. I need to make it out there. Next question.
Dave Troutman in Edmonton, Canada writes in, food is often the reason people gather. This produces a sense of community. What effect does this have on the style of food people prepare?
Oh, wow. That's a great question, and also a very, very true statement. The thing I love, and even to maybe further that point, the thing I love about food, and I believe it was Alex, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that mentioned, how great of a city Toronto is in terms of multiculturalism and diversity. That food is often our very first, kind of like trip that we take to another community or another culture, or to really, really get to know someone. We do use it when we gather. We use it to celebrate. We use it to console. And I feel like that really is what makes it kind of like radiate and shine on that plate when people are presenting it. As asking the question, I think, there's so much pride that comes from not just like highlighting something that's your own personally, but I think those links go deeper into like family. A lot of restaurants, whether they're large or small, most of the initial recipes were based on something that someone ate growing up, something that really meant something to them. So yeah, that's one of my biggest joys about being in this city and working in the food space is that food is such a great connector to people, to history, and brings people together, whether it's, bringing people that you're already familiar with together or people who could be strangers. That's also, a big part of it.
And just out of curiosity, have you, or even maybe some of the restaurants that you've worked with, have there been like tastings or like meetups that just from the community aspect?
Yeah.
If you've tried that, how has that worked out?
Yes. So actually, that's one of the things I actually credit my growth with, is that as Instagram and sharing food on Instagram was starting to grow in popularity, there was a very tight knit network and community of food content creators that we would always gather. And, if somebody was thinking about going to a new place or there was something that everyone was talking about that was on your radar, oftentimes we would go together. And not just sharing food, sharing tips and tricks, everything that I know about, or maybe the little I know about, photography and content creation, I can attribute 90% of it to, somebody in this food community who was just gracious enough to share trade secrets with me, or send me the Amazon link to that light box that they're using, or, this is the best backup battery, or make sure you've got 2 or 3 of these because this has a short life. So yeah, the community aspect through these meetups is a reason for my growth, and it's something that's definitely still done to today.
Great. Next question.
Sky Gleason in Seattle, Washington writes in, when creating your content, what balance do you think about between entertainment and education?
Great question. It's funny because it is a consideration. And there are times where it's simply led by the image. I mean, there's some things that, again, I think I mentioned earlier, will just speak for themselves. There's a pizza. Well, actually, it's a restaurant cafe, an Italian place in Toronto called Mamana's. And they do these special make to order pizza slices that are literally, I would say, half of my body. And I remember when I first saw them, I was thinking, this is just a gimmick to get people talking or to get people in. This restaurant actually does really great food, and just figured out, a really smart marketing tool, but can back it up with, with some food that is really going to satisfy you. So, there's things like that, that's just fun. You may get some people kind of being skeptical of it, but like, I think again, it's almost a version of like reading the room. If I'm at a restaurant and maybe it's owned by a BIPOC owner whose food isn't very prevalent or talked about in the city, A friend of mine just opened a Malaysian place. There's not a lot of Malaysian food in Toronto. So when I'm covering that, that's not about me. You know what I mean? That's going to be about the story, the food, the ingredients, how can they try more? Why isn't there more Malaysian food in Toronto? So I really try to take a beat on not just like what I'm showing, but what is most appropriate to be discussed or presented, depending on the food, depending on the person.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael writes in, do you think the growth of UberEats and other food delivery services can be beneficial to established restaurants if they build their strategy right?
I do. And I think it's because a lot of folks, there's it's a weird kind of thing. Like there's some people I know, like, excuse me, sorry. My assumption is that, most people are like me. They want to go out to restaurants and have that lived out their experience. There's some folks that, they may not want to go out, or, that may not be their thing. There's a level of like, it's such a tricky thing. And I've only been like made aware of this throughout a lot of conversation, but there's some people that feel like sometimes they want to try a certain restaurant, but they feel like they don't belong there, or they don't fit, or they may not be welcomed, or maybe they don't know how to order certain things. I saw a story about someone that the first time they ever had wine at a restaurant, the waiter at a really nice restaurant, the waiter brought the bottle out, and someone at the table will just do a quick tasting and acknowledge that it's okay, and then you pour for the rest of the table, and they grab the bottle and drank it, right? And we're completely, this might sound ridiculous, but there's a lot of different social cues or social situations that don't always allow for like comfort or awareness. So I think that like a lot of times people's first kind of like foray into or experience with a restaurant might be more comfortable at home. I was on a podcast that was led by someone that has vision issues, and they said a lot of restaurants are just simply too dark for them to navigate comfortably in. Right. So oftentimes they find themselves using delivery options. So, there could be a whole host of reasons why someone may not make it out somewhere. And I think if you can tap into that, you can bring people in. And we're also just coming off of a pandemic where we saw the importance of being able to deliver to people. So again, sorry, another long answer, but yes, I definitely think that if your strategy is built correctly around that method, it can be very beneficial.
Oh, great. We're taking it all in. Next question.
Paul Walhus in Austin, Texas writes in, what has been the response to your Instagram channel, instagram.com/eatfamous, and where else can we find you online? Is this your first Zoom meeting?
Okay. So I feel like there's been definitely a pretty positive response. Not everybody's going to love what you do. There's some people that follow me, and I have no reason why, or I should say no idea why, because they may comment and be critical of everything, but I feel like there's definitely been a great overall response to it. As mentioned a little earlier in the show, I also do have TikTok. It's Eat Famous Official, because someone took Eat Famous when I checked. Those are definitely the main places that you can find me. And no, not my first Zoom, but definitely one of the funnest and most interactive. I love this format.
Awesome. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael writes in, how can live content be beneficial to the restaurant industry?
Oh, that's great. I think, what live content has the opportunity to really show like the personality and heart and soul of a restaurant. A lot of times, if you're going in, you might just be picking something up and going, or it might be just, your singular experience with your server at your table. Whereas a live experience, just, and I hope that's what they mean. Like, I'm assuming they mean like me capturing something live in the moment at a restaurant. You can see a lot of things. I think also too, when the camera's turned on, a restaurant is going to really try to show you why you want to come, what's fun, why is the food so great. And it, also can give you a window into, little parts that you might see. Like a lot of times, if it's possible, I sneak into the kitchen. I'm talking to chefs and cooks and showing other parts of the process that a lot of time you're not privy to if you don't have that window in.
Next question.
Paul Walhuth from Austin, Texas. Texas is famous for fried chicken. Where is the best place to get it, and how do you make it, including white gravy? And is this just a Texas phenomenon?
Wow, so fried chicken, I'm definitely familiar with, and I've had white gravy. I don't know if I have a recommendation, but I definitely don't think I've seen it anywhere other than Texas. I know I've not seen it in Toronto.
Next question.
Paul Walhuth again from Austin. Will you go to the Texas Monthly BBQ Festival in Lockhart, November 4th, 2023? And he includes the link.
That sounds like an invitation, Paul.
I am there. Like I said, I've been planning a return to Texas. I apparently have a lot of work to do. So if there's a barbecue festival, then yeah, consider me there.
Well, thank you so much, Ryan, for just sharing all of your insights, and you delivered, because I said that this is the community. There are a number of people who are looking at, here's their full-time job, much like you had, and there's something they're working on the side and hoping for it to, matriculate into something more substantial. And you shared the ins and outs. And I just want to give you a moment to leave any parting words for our community of like technologists, but then there are also creatives and those inside of organizations as it relates to building community and growing on social media.
Right. Okay. Well, first off, I have to say, and again, this is because I had the opportunity to watch the beginning part of the show, is keep doing what you're doing. Communities and forums like this are so essential. I know I picked up a couple of tips when I was just listening in, and the selflessness with which everyone was giving, and the space that allowed everyone to speak and share, and I've seen people kind of lift each other up was great. So I think that's my first message, is to keep doing what you're doing, and congratulations to everybody involved. As for myself, I'm just, hoping to kind of contribute to society and make people happy. That's definitely my goal, is using tech, is using, digital platforms to spread some joy. If I can help some businesses and people grow and find some passion, then I think my job is done.
And what's next for you, Ryan?
So next there is a book deal on the table. So looking at kind of telling the story of what a food culturalist is, because often when I when I say what I do, it's met with a little bit of a, hey, what is that? So hopefully this book will not only explain what that is, but show some love to some of my favorite spots and food experiences that I've had in Toronto and abroad. And also working on the development of a web series that's going to see me and a couple other creatives, highlight some very, very special things. So yeah, there's definitely some more to come.
Wonderful. Well, you heard it here first, office hours, and you can't see our community chat, but just like fun info. Thank you, Ryan, like just there. So thank you so much, Ryan, for being here. Ryan Hinkson at Eat Famous. Go check him out. So even when you're traveling, that some of the places in Toronto and around the globe. And to our producers, thank you so much for your questions and your engagement, to our panelists for your insightful feedback and tips, and of course to our production team, for without which this would not be possible. Now, if you want to know what is happening for this week, head over to officehours.global. Tomorrow, we've got broadcast graphics with presentation tools, and we have traveled on the Taluk Traversal 77,098 miles. That's 124,076 kilometers. That's more than 610 million bananas for scale. That's 3.1 times around the earth. And thank you so much, everyone. And we will see you in after hours. Bye.
This channel, this interview made me want to start a new hashtag. It's all about the cheese ball.
How many sauteed plantains is it around for the distance? I'm not sure.
Plantains, yes, that sounds scrumptious. Oh, we start whispering, Ryan. That's what this is at the end of the show.
Chicken fried chicken is chicken fried steak with chicken.
Thanks again, Ryan. That was great.
Well done.
Did you get some of that Tuscan chicken left over from Cheesecake Factory?